Continuing with the Phonix Festival Tournament, we move on to Day 4 of Round 2 with more singles, doubles, and teams matches to go over. As always, linked in the description down below are all of the Google Forms where you guys can go and vote for who you think would win in each match and give your reasoning as to why. Whether it's due to experience, weapon, semblance advantage, etc., you guys know the drill by now. A reason has to be given for each of your choices. But getting into our first match of the day, we have a little bit of infighting between our protagonists. We have RWBY Rose versus Nora Valkyrie in the urban and lava biomes. Now, both of these characters, I would argue, are equally skilled. Both members of Team Ranger that fought their way across Mistral, fought at the Battle of Haven Academy, and now in Atlas are both fully licensed huntresses that have gotten training from the Aesops. So skill-wise, I would argue they're equal, but when we compare their actual skill sets, they are quite different. Nora, of course, has a lot more power than RWBY, especially with her semblance of high voltage, being able to increase her physical strength and deal a lot of damage with her hammer, but RWBY is just faster. Thanks to her semblance of Petal Burst, she can dart around the battlefield, and I have a hard time believing that Nora would be able to land a hit against RWBY. Whereas RWBY, darting around, could fire off sniper shots. Sure, Nora could launch some grenades at RWBY, but I think RWBY would be able to dodge out of the way of those. RWBY firing sniper shots could take out Nora from a distance, as well as getting close with Crescent Rose, dealing some blows as she's just darting past Nora, even. So I feel like RWBY just has the advantage in this fight when it comes to power versus speed. Speed often has the advantage if the power can't actually end up hitting the speed. Now, if Nora was able to land a charged up hit against RWBY, that could possibly end the fight in a single blow, but I think RWBY would win more often than not. Again, we'll leave it up to you guys in the voting below. Moving on to our second match, though, we have Clover Ebby versus Penny Polendina in the mountain and urban biomes. Now, Penny is a powerhouse character. She's not going to be using the newly acquired maiden powers that she got at the end of Volume 7, but she can still fly through the air and has her floating array that consists of numerous blades that can also fire off lasers. Now, Clover is the leader of the Aesops, an experienced huntsman in his own right, and has the semblance of good fortune. With his weapon of Kingfisher, he could easily send out a line, grab Penny even if she is in mid-air, and be able to keep her grounded, slammed to the ground. But the thing is, Clover, with his weapons and skill set, doesn't really have a finisher. In the Aesops, even though he is the leader of the team, he fills more of a support role, with his semblance of good fortune boosting the rest of his team and his Kingfisher being able to make a few lucky shots against opponents and put them in positions where the rest of his team can deal that finishing blow. As we saw in Volume 7 when the Aesops were fighting against the Petragigas. When Clover sent out his fishing line, he pulled the Geist out of its body, but Harriet was the one who dealt the finishing blow. Kingfisher just wouldn't have the ability to deal that blow that would break Penny's aura. At least not before Penny was able to break his, because if Clover is able to ground her, that means Kingfisher is wrapped around her, and Penny would be in close enough range to use her blades, the floating array, and the lasers to knock Clover out. So I think Penny takes this one. And then moving on to our third fight, and possibly the most intense fight of today's matches, is Neopolitan versus Hazel Rainart in the anti-gravity and ice biomes. Now, Hazel is probably the biggest tank we have seen in the RWBY series. Not only does he stand 8 feet tall, but he is also extremely strong and has aura regeneration on a level that we haven't seen naturally in anyone in the RWBY series. Zhang, of course, beats him out in that category, but that's thanks to his semblance. Hazel just has this inherently in his body. And then, of course, he has his semblance of numbing agent that can nullify his pain so he can inject dust into his own body. We've seen him do this with fire and lightning dust so far, and then can launch out elemental attacks, and also boosts his own physical strength on top of that. But he falls into the same pitfall that Nora does. He still needs to be able to hit his opponent to be able to deal the damage and knock them out, and he's fighting against Neopolitan. She is one of the most agile and difficult opponents to hit, I would argue, in the RWBY series, especially using her weapon of Hush, the umbrella. Neo often uses that to block opponents' attacks first and kind of parry them out of the way, allowing them to just glide past her, narrowly miss her, etc. So Neo would be a difficult opponent for Hazel to face. Not to mention, she also has her overactive imagination, being able to create illusions, making it so Hazel's attacks, when he thinks he's attacking Neo, is attacking something completely different, something that's not even there. And we're not even getting into the fact that Neo can completely mess with Hazel's mental state. because she can cloak herself as other characters. We already saw her masquerade as Oscar in Volume 7, so that in and of itself would send Hazel a bit over the edge. Even if he was calm coming into the fight, Neo could easily rattle him. Not to mention that we're also assuming that everyone in Round 2 was able to watch all of the Round 1 matches. Neo already knows what Ozpin looks like, and could easily mask herself as Ozpin himself. So that would definitely send Hazel over the edge, into a bit of a rage, at least mess with his mental state. Even if he is able to snap himself out of it, he'll still be a little bit, I would say, off balance mentally for the rest of the fight, and that would give Neo even more of an advantage. Getting into the biome advantage on top of that, I could easily see Neo being able to use the anti-gravity biomes to her advantage. If she's able to lure Hazel into there in some way, just piss him off and have him charge after her, she could easily use the anti-gravity biome. Being able to use her acrobatics going from platform to platform, she would eventually work out the timing of the shifts between the gravity and be able to use that to her advantage, knocking Hazel back and forth. His aura would eventually be whittled down. Neo would be dealing strikes against him at that point on top of that. So I think Neo would end up winning against Hazel, but it would be a long fought battle, because she would have to deal enough blows and mess with him enough to reduce his aura. Now, as he is injecting dust into himself and continuously using his semblance, that would reduce his aura as well, so she just needs to drag the fight out, which Neo is fully capable of doing, and I find it hard to believe that Hazel would be able to hit Neo if Neo really didn't want him to. So I think Neo would actually take Hazel out in this fight. But let me know your thoughts on this one down in the comments below and through voting. What do you guys think? Hazel versus Neo, who's coming out on top? Because if Hazel is able to land a hit on Neo, then Neo could go down pretty quickly as well, especially if it's dust charged with electricity, you know, things like that could easily turn the tide, but I'll leave that up to you guys to decide. And then we get to our fourth fight, which is Junior Zhang versus Yatsuhashi Daichi in the anti-gravity and geyser biomes. Two bruiser characters that deal heavy blows to their opponents. Junior fighting with his bazooka that is also a club, and Yatsuhashi fighting with his fulcrum, a greatsword that he can use with a one-handed swing to absolutely shatter the ground around him. So when it comes to sheer strength, Yatsuhashi's winning in that category. Now, if Junior is able to use his bazooka and deal some heavy blows against Yatsuhashi, weaken him before he gets close, then Junior might be able to win this fight, but overall, I don't see Yatsuhashi losing against Junior, especially if he, you know, uses his second hand and slams the blade into the ground like he did in Volume 3 when he fought against Mercury. He was able to shatter an entire biome, so I think Yatsuhashi just takes this one. Moving on to our fifth match, though, we have Sienna versus Dudley in the ice and savanna biomes. Now, both of these characters are skilled. Dudley is a graduated huntsman, though just barely, but Sienna, being the leader of the White Fang and also a member of the White Fang for much longer, fighting as one of its main enforcers, she has much more skill. Plus, we have her weapon and her semblance on top of that. Now, her weapon isn't really known for dealing that much damage until her semblance of grudge can power her up. Dudley does fight with his rifle. That would be more of a long-range weapon. If he is able to land a couple blows against Sienna, he might have a fraction of a chance, but Sienna is a very fast character, probably much faster than Dudley, would be able to avoid a lot of his shots, get close, deal damage with her Cerberus Whip, and the more damage that Dudley takes, the stronger Sienna would get, and the easier it would be for Sienna to win. Unfortunately, Dudley, I don't think, stands a chance in this fight. Moving on to our sixth one, though, we have Carmen Esclados versus Oscar Pine in the savanna and mountain biomes. Now, Oscar has gotten a lot of training since we first met him back in Volume 4, and now fighting in Atlas with Ozpin's return, hopefully we will see a lot more skill from him, possibly his semblance in Volume 8, but for right now, he can't win out against a fully trained huntress like Carmen Esclados is. She's a graduate of Shade Academy, has the same semblance of telekinesis as Glinda Goodwitch, though not as powerful and not really much of a factor when it comes to the biomes in play, Savannah and Mountain. Not really many light things that you can manipulate, but Carmen easily manipulates her weapons, which are her sai that she can have whip around the battlefield and would be able to overwhelm Oscar. I think Carmen just takes Oscar out in this fight, unfortunately for Oscar. And then moving on to our seventh match, we have Bolin Hori versus Melanie Malachite in the desert and ice biomes. As much as I like Melanie Malachite fighting with the weapons that she does, they're a lot closer range versus Bolin's weapon, which is a staff that has blades at the end of it. So Bolin has the reach, even if Melanie is a little bit faster, so this would be a fairly interesting dynamic, but Melanie isn't professionally trained at a Huntsman Academy like Bolin is. So I think, unfortunately for the Malachite twin, Bolin would end up winning this one by weapon advantage mostly, and also skill advantage because he has had the training at the Huntsman Academies and the combat schools before that, etc. Melanie, although she is skilled, she did lose to Yang. Bolin gave Yang a little bit of trouble in Volume 3, so, you know, I think that Bolin would take this one. And then our last match of the singles category is Dove Bronzewing versus Fiona Time in the Mountain and Ice biomes. This one pretty much comes down to an overall skill advantage. Dove is one of the more skilled members of Team Cardinal, as he fights with his sword that also has a gun in the hilt, possibly dust capabilities, but Dove is up against Fiona, who doesn't really have the most combat-oriented semblance with being able to store things in her aura. She could use that to her advantage, but we haven't really seen her use that in battle just for stealing things. But she is a fully trained huntress, graduate of Atlas Academy, so she has more training and more skill than Dove, and we know about the same amount with their fighting styles. We have seen Dove fight in Volume 3, or in Volume 2 against Pyrrha, but Fiona, although we haven't seen her fight, we know the weapon she fights with, the Happy Huntress, pretty much standard weapon, a staff that has a crossbow and blades on each end, but being a trained huntress, she would have more skill in battle, and I think she would just win out over Dove. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments below for these singles matches. But moving on to the doubles matches for today, we have Mercury Black and Raven Branwen versus Talk and Ilya Amatola in the Ice and Anti-Gravity biomes. Now, it's always interesting to see how Talk would end up fighting against opponents, because with her semblance of invincibility for 60 seconds, that makes it very tricky. No matter how skilled an opponent is, they literally just can't deal damage to Talk for those 60 seconds. Raven Branwen, I would argue, is just as skilled as Talk and would be able to handle her, but keeping up with her for 60 seconds where Talk does not have to worry about defense whatsoever would be very difficult for her to do. She can't use any of her maiden powers or transform into a bird, so there's no way for her to run away that way, and she wouldn't be able to use her semblance of Kindred Link because there's no one on the battlefield that she would be able to have that link to. When it comes to Mercury Black and Ilya Amatola, Ilya is probably not as skilled as Mercury. She did lose to Sun in Volume 5, so Mercury would probably be able to handle Ilya while Raven dealt with Talk. Now, if Talk went after Mercury first and Raven ended up dealing with Ilya, then it would end up being a 2 versus 1 when it came to Mercury and Raven versus Talk. I feel like Ilya would probably be the first to knock out of these 4 characters, but the key to this match would come to when Talk activated her semblance. We saw in Volume 6 when she was first introduced, and last introduced, as she died the same episode where she was introduced, she activated her semblance immediately in battle because she knew the opponent that she was going up against, the Grim Reaper. And going up against Raven Branwen probably would do the same thing, but also realizing that Raven might be able to outlast those 60 seconds, she might wait a little bit, activate it a little bit later on, but we don't know if Talk's aura being reduced before she activates her semblance means that it might not be activated for 60 seconds. However that may be. Regardless though, I do see both Mercury and Raven, at least one of them, outlasting Talk's 60 seconds, and once those 60 seconds are up, Talk's aura breaks immediately. So if they can last out those 60 seconds once Talk activates her semblance, then they just end up winning, and I can see either Mercury or Raven end up beating Ilya. So I do think that Mercury and Raven will win this fight. In our second fight, though, we have Neon Cat and Peter Port versus Winter Schnee and Cardin Winchester in the Lava and Desert biomes. Now, Neon Cat, definitely a very speedy character, but fighting with her rollerblades, she really doesn't have good luck with these biomes, as the lava and desert biome doesn't really give good terrain for her style of movement. Peter Port, not really the fastest character, but he is a professor at Beacon Academy, a trained huntsman with a lot of bombastic stories under his belt of all of the achievements he has had on his many hunts for Grimm. So he's definitely a skilled huntsman. I would love to learn more about his character and his past and his history and, you know, find out more about his fighting style, but up against Winter Schnee with the semblance of glyphs, she would in theory be able to do everything that Weiss has been able to do with the glyphs, manipulating momentum, launching herself forward using gravity, and possibly time dilation as well, if that's still a thing in RWBY, if that hasn't been, you know, retconned out of it. But still, she also has her summoning, the Beowulfs and the Beowulf Swarm, the Alpha Beowulf, the Baby Nevermore Swarm, and the Manticore, her flying Grim that was introduced in Volume 7. Fighting alongside Carden Winchester, he's no pushover either, and would be able to keep up with Neon. Now, Neon we did see in Volume 7, she has had more training since the Vital Festival Tournament in Volume 3, so she would probably be able to outclass Carden, as the last time we saw him was in Volume 3, but still I think Carden would be able to keep pace with her fairly well, and Winter with her versatility, I feel like she would be able to overwhelm Port and Neon at the same time, so I think Winter and Carden would end up winning this fight. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. Do you think that Winter and Peter Port would be more of an even match, that Port's experience as a huntsman would level the playing field against Winter's versatility using the semblance of glyphs? We haven't seen her use the glyphs exactly the same way as Weiss, but considering it's been said that they have the exact same semblance, it's understandable that they could do the exact same things. Though we don't know exactly what types of dust Winter carries on her person, so that could easily be a factor as to what dust she could use in battle and that versatility, but she's still very versatile nonetheless. So let me know your thoughts on that one down in the comments below. Moving on to the team matches, though, we have in our first match Team Esprit, which is Clover Ebby, Winter Schnee, Penny Polendina, and James Ironwood versus Team Funky, Flint Cole, Neon Cat, Cobalt, and Ivory, and they are fighting in the mountain and desert biomes. Right out of the gate, I don't really see Team Funky winning this one, because they are currently students at Atlas Academy, fighting against everyone who is literally their superior. The headmaster of the academy, James Ironwood, plus 3 other members of the military. I don't really know if Penny's actually part of the military, but she's the defender of Mantle. Not really something that a student at Atlas Academy can claim. Plus, Winter seems to be, at least from what we saw at the end of Volume 7, where she was kind of coordinating the students, she's possibly an instructor at Atlas Academy. I would love to get an expansion on that at some point, but with Salem showing up, that probably won't end up happening. Still, Winter's definitely her higher up, and also Clover Ebby being a graduate from Atlas Academy, definitely their superior. Just the skill level alone between the teams is pretty large, and Team Funky would end up being overwhelmed. Not to mention we don't really know Cobalt or Ivory's semblances, and same with Neon's. Flint's semblance, his killer quartet, can definitely boost the attacks that he has from his trumpet, but with Clover's good luck, as well as Ironwood being able to use his gravity dust bullets and the other bullets from Due Process on top of that, Penny being able to fly in the battlefield and use her floating array, firing lasers and dealing damage with her blades, Winter Schnee's versatility with her glyphs, etc. Like, Team Esprit just outclasses Team Funky in this fight. Unfortunate for Team Funky. And then in our second team match of the day, we have Team Sun versus Team Ashbury. Team Sun, of course, consisting of Sun Wukong, Sage Ayana, Starlet David, and Neptune Vasilius, and Team Ashbury consisting of Ilya Amatola, Sienna Khan, Gira, and Kali Belladonna. And they are fighting in the mountain and forest biomes. Now, in this fight, there's a few interesting matchups, and I could see this going either way. Sun was able to take out Ilya back in Volume 5, so if they were to pair it up against each other, Sun would likely win again. But when it comes to the entirety of Team Sun, I would argue that they are relatively equal in skill level to one another. They're all in the same year at Shade Academy, and it didn't really seem like any of them was superior in fighting style to any of the others when we saw them in Before the Dawn. So they are arguably on the same skill level. Sun is a bit more skilled than Ilya, being able to take her out in combat. Kali, unfortunately, is very likely less skilled than Team Sun, but then there's Sienna Khan and Gira Belladonna, both, I would argue, more skilled than Team Sun, as they are both respective leaders of the White Fang, and have a lot of power in their own right. If Ilya and Kali are taken out and Team Sun starts having their aura reduced, Sienna is only going to get stronger and more ferocious in battle, and would be able to deal a lot of damage to Team Sun and get them out of the way. Now, Gira is a close combat fighter, and if he is able to deal any damage to any member of Team Sun, he could deal a lot of damage, send them flying across the biomes and Amity Coliseum. But there is one problem when it comes to Team Ashbury. Gira, Kali, and Sienna don't really have ranged weapons. Sienna can fire off the blades from her Cerberus Whip and deal elemental damage that way, so she could mess up the opponent's guns at some point if she's able to hit Neptune's Tryhard, the railgun that he has, as he's firing from a distance away. Then that could freeze it to his hands, prevent it from firing, and she would be able to get an advantage that way. But when it comes to Team Sun, Neptune has his railgun, Scarlet has his pistol, and Sun has his gunchucks. Now, his gunchucks are more close combat styled guns, I would argue, being shotguns, not really good for long range, but could definitely stay out of the range of Gira's attacks at the very least. And so with having more ranged combat, it would be an interesting dynamic to see how these two would match up. Sage, being the strongest member of Team Sun, physically at least, would possibly be able to match up against Gira, though I could see Gira being able to block Sage's sword and deal some heavy blows against him. So this match would be fairly interesting to see. It would be back and forth, and Sienna Khan's semblance of grudge would be a major turning point for the battle. How much it ends up getting charged up by both her allies' aura being reduced and the opponent's aura. With team matches like this, Sienna has 7 other characters that are kind of clustered around her in Amity Coliseum. Yes, they are spread out over the 2 biomes, but it still might be within enough range for Sienna to start boosting her semblance. And with her semblance of grudge, even if there are 1 or 2 characters close enough to boost her strength upwards, then she could start taking out members of Team Sun without too much difficulty, I would think. So if Team Sun is able to gang up and take out Sienna first, then they would have a clear advantage in this fight, but if Sienna Khan gets her semblance charged up, then she could take this fight as well. I would say that generally Team Ashbury might end up winning this because their team is more cohesive versus Team Sun's, as there was a lot of disorganization with them in Before the Dawn, and they haven't really had that much time to actually train together, learn each other's fighting styles, etc., because Sun kind of took off on his own for quite some time. And in Before the Dawn, we saw the turmoil between them. They did come to terms by the end of it, but we don't know how their training has progressed since then. So I would kind of have to pick Team Ashbury in this one because of Gira and Sienna being able to take out members of Team Sun. Gira at least matching Sage. If he was matched up against anyone else, got close combat, he would be able to take them out, and Sienna being able to charge up her semblance if Ilya and Kali got taken out, and if members of Team Sun had their aura reduced. I think Team Ashbury does have this one. But it could go either way, as I mentioned before. This one, let me know down in the comments below what you guys think. So hopefully you guys are enjoying these matches and will enjoy the rest of the Phonix Festival Tournament. Make sure to subscribe so you guys can keep up with the tournament itself, as well as other RWBY content that is releasing. Tweet me at PhoenixKnight7, join our Discord server as well, link in the description below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.